This is a work of fiction, inspired by historical accounts, and does not promote or glorify illegal activities. Allow me to relate the events I witnessed, though I fear that in doing so I will condemn my own soul to discredit or madness. I seek no one's pity, nor their understanding. I record these events only as a warning to those who, like me, may find themselves teetering on the brink of forbidden knowledge. There are secrets in this world that should remain buried in the depths of eternal oblivion. My name is Thomas Blackwood, and until 3 months ago, I was a professor of anthropology at Miskatonic University, specializing in the ancient rituals of isolated cultures. My academic reputation was impeccable, my mind as rational as one might expect of a man of science. How I regret the curiosity that drove me into the investigation that is now destroying me. It all began when I inherited my great-uncle Elijah's estate in the secluded village of Ravenscroft on the eastern seaboard. Elijah was considered eccentric by the locals, a recluse who rarely left his mansion for the last 20 years of his life. After his death, I discovered that I was his only living relative, and so I became the owner of a modest fortune and the dark Victorian mansion that stood on the cliffs, perpetually buffeted by the bitter winds of the North Atlantic. The drive to Ravenscroft was a harbinger of the horror that awaited me. The leaden sky seemed to press down on the earth, and a persistent fog enveloped the road, as if trying to deter visitors. Throughout the journey, I felt a tingling sensation at the base of my spine, that primitive sense of alertness that our ancestors developed to survive the predators of the night. The village itself seemed to resent my presence. The few inhabitants I met in the narrow, poorly lit streets looked away as I passed, muttering to themselves. In the small local market, the only person who addressed me directly was an elderly woman, her eyes as cloudy as the sea in a storm. "You are Elijah Blackwood's nephew," she said, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement. "The house has been waiting for you." Before I could question the meaning of her words, she walked away, her feet shuffling across the worn wooden floor. It was only the first of many strange interactions I would experience at Ravenscroft. The mansion stood at the highest point of the cliffs, a black sentinel against the perpetually grey sky. Its Victorian architecture, though in some decline, still preserved an austere beauty, with tall windows and pointed turrets that seemed to pierce the low-hanging clouds. As I approached, I noticed that the garden was overgrown with vegetation, as if nature itself were trying to reclaim the territory. The local solicitor had mailed me the keys, along with detailed instructions on how to care for the property. "Your great-uncle's house has its peculiarities," he wrote. "I strongly recommend that you keep all the windows closed at night, regardless of the heat, and that you do not remove the symbols carved into the door frames." At the time, I dismissed such precautions as local superstitions, perhaps encouraged by Elijah himself to keep out the curious. How foolish I had been to ignore that warning. The front door swung open with a drawn-out groan, as if the house were exhaling a long-held sigh. The air inside was thick with the unmistakable scent of old books, aged wood, and something else, something I couldn't immediately identify. Only later would I recognize it as the odor of decay, not just physical but spiritual. The entrance hall was dominated by a majestic staircase that wound its way to the upper floor, its dark wooden treads seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. To my right, a large living room displayed furniture draped in white linens, like ghosts frozen in their final positions. To my left, a pair of double doors led to the library, which, as I came to discover, was the true heart of this cursed residence. Settled into a room on the second floor, the one that had presumably belonged to Elijah himself. It was spacious, with an impressive four-poster bed and a desk facing the window that offered a panoramic view of the unforgiving ocean below. For the first few days, I devoted myself to exploring the house, cataloguing its contents, and familiarizing myself with its labyrinthine layout. The library, however, was what fascinated me most. The walls were lined with bookshelves that reached all the way to the ceiling, filled with rare volumes and manuscripts that any prestigious university would covet. Many of the works were on esoteric subjects, treatises on medieval alchemy, tomes devoted to the pre-Christian religions of Europe, and numerous volumes on obscure cults from around the world. As an anthropologist, I could not help but be drawn to such a collection. Among the most notable books, I found several of Elijah's own diaries, carefully numbered and dated. I began reading them chronologically, hoping to better understand the man who had left me such a legacy. The first volumes were quite conventional, recounting his travels around the world and encounters with distant cultures. Elijah had been a respected explorer and collector in his time, something I had completely ignored. It was by the fifth diary that I noticed a change in his writing. His handwriting, previously meticulous and controlled, had become more frenetic, the margins filled with strange symbols that did not belong to any known alphabet. Elijah began to report disturbing dreams of sunken cities and entities that inhabited the depths of the ocean, beings he called the Old Ones. Even more alarming was his growing obsession with the mansion's walls. He wrote, "The walls are not mere dividers between spaces. They are membranes between worlds. I can hear them, now murmuring on the other side. They are waiting, always waiting. I have found the symbols of protection in the texts of Reliah, but I fear they are not enough." Elijah wrote elsewhere, "The sound is louder at night, a constant murmur like waves breaking on a distant shore, but with a rhythm that suggests language. I have tried to record it, but the devices invariably fail. Only human ears can discern it. I wonder if this is what drives so many coastal dwellers mad." If you've watched this far, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my discoveries about the hidden secrets that exist at the edges of our reality. Your comments are important. Please share your own experiences with unexplained phenomena that test the limits of human sanity. As I read on, I discovered that Elijah had begun to investigate the history of the house itself. Apparently, the mansion had been built in the late 18th century by a sea captain named Jeremiah Blackwood, who had made his fortune traveling to distant lands. Local rumors suggested that his wealth came not only from legitimate trade, but also from pacts with sea entities that guaranteed safe passage for his ships. Most intriguing were Elijah's references to a secret chamber beneath the mansion, a space that Jeremiah supposedly used to perform rituals dedicated to these entities. According to the journals, the entrance to this chamber was hidden in the library itself, behind a specific section of bookshelves. I confess that at that moment, my academic skepticism still prevailed. I interpreted my great-uncle's writings as the fantasies of a mind isolated for too long, perhaps affected by old age or some undiagnosed neurological condition. Still, curiosity impelled me to seek out the supposed secret chamber, if only to prove to myself that it was a mere fabrication. It was on my third night in the mansion that I first heard the murmur. I was in the library, examining the section that Elijah had said hid the entrance to the subterranean chamber. The wind howled outside, making the structure of the house creak and groan like a ship at sea. The light from the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating the illusion of movement at the edges of my vision. Then I noticed it, a barely audible sound, not coming from outside, but from the walls themselves. At first, I thought it was the wind in the cracks of the ancient structure, or perhaps rodents in the spaces between the walls. I moved closer, pressing my ear against the faded wallpaper. What I heard made my blood run cold. It was a rhythmic murmur, not produced by any animal or natural phenomenon I knew of. It had a lilt, suggesting language, though it was incomprehensible to my human ears. And most disturbing of all, it seemed to respond to my presence. As I approached, the sound intensified, as if the transmitters were aware of my attention. I instinctively recoiled, knocking over a stack of books in the process. The crash seemed to break some kind of spell, and the murmuring ceased. I lay still for several minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the sound to return. But the house was now completely silent, save for the crackling of the logs in the fireplace. That night I fell asleep reading Elijah's journals with renewed interest. His observations about the sounds in the walls no longer seemed so fanciful. However, sleep brought no rest, but rather disturbing dreams of underwater cities with impossible geometry, where amorphous beings glided between algae-covered pillars, chanting in an ancient language that I somehow understood partially in my dream, though upon waking I could not recall a single word. The days that followed established an unsettling pattern. During the day, I explored the library and studied the journals with increasing obsession. At night, the murmurs returned, growing louder and more insistent. I began to notice that they were more intense in certain areas of the house, particularly the library and my bedroom, which was directly above it. On the seventh day, I found what appeared to be the entrance to the secret chamber. Guided by Elijah's notes, I discovered that one of the bookshelves in the occult section rotated when a particular book was pulled. Sea Cults of the South Pacific Islands, an innocent-looking leather-bound volume. The mechanism was ingenious, revealing a narrow passageway and a stone staircase that led down into the depths of the house. Armed with a flashlight and driven by a curiosity that I now recognize as unhealthy, I descended the time-worn steps. The air grew colder and damper with each step, and a brackish odor reminiscent of the sea permeated the room. The walls were rough stone, unlike the Victorian structure of the mansion, suggesting that this passage was much older than the house itself. The staircase ended in a circular antechamber, the walls of which were intricately carved. My flashlight revealed symbols that I recognized from some South Pacific culture, but also many others that did not belong to any known writing system. They all seemed to converge on a massive door of dark wood, reinforced with bands of blackish-green metal that I assumed was bronze, corroded by age and humidity. In the center of the door, where a doorknob would normally be, was a stone disc, with concentric carvings, similar to an astronomical calendar. Consulting Elijah's notes, I learned that the disc had to be turned in a specific sequence to open the door. I hesitated. Everything in my scientific training screamed at me to document this discovery properly before proceeding. Yet there was another urge, something primal and insistent, that compelled me to continue, to see what lay beyond that door. It was as if the whispers in the walls had found an echo in my own mind, implanting an irresistible desire for forbidden knowledge. With trembling fingers, I turned the dial as instructed. There was a metallic click, followed by the sound of ancient gears slowly turning. The door swung open a few inches, releasing a blast of stale air that extinguished my flashlight, plunging me into absolute darkness. For a moment of clarity, I considered retreating, climbing the stairs and sealing the passage. I could leave Ravenscroft immediately, return to the safety of the academy, and forget what I had found. But I knew, deep down, that it was already too late. The whispers had infiltrated my dreams, my thoughts. I could no longer distinguish my natural curiosity from the implanted compulsion. And so I relit the flashlight and pushed open the door. The chamber beyond was wide and irregular, not a space constructed by human hands, but an enlarged and adapted natural cave. The ceiling was high and vaulted, supported by columns that blended natural rock formations with man-made structures. The floor sloped gently toward the center, where there was a circular well filled with dark, perfectly still water, like liquid obsidian. Around the well, arranged in a semicircle, was a stone altar and 5 grotesque statues representing humanoid entities with heads that resembled cephalopods, their alien features frozen in expressions that suggested both reverence and horror. Upon the altar rested an immense book, bound in what appeared to be reptilian skin, its yellowed pages open to a specific passage. I approached cautiously, aware of every echo my footsteps produced in that ancient space. The book was written in several languages, some of which I recognized: Latin, ancient Greek, Sanskrit, interspersed with others completely unfamiliar to me. Some of the text seemed to be a ritual, with precise instructions and chants. It was at that moment that the murmurs in the walls intensified dramatically, no longer muffled by the structure of the house, but direct and clear, as if emanating from the statues themselves or perhaps from the black, still water. And to my utter horror, I began to understand them. It was not that I could translate the words exactly, it was something more visceral, an understanding that formed directly in my mind, bypassing normal linguistic processes. They spoke of times before the rise of humanity, when other entities dominated the earth. They spoke of submerged cities where these beings waited, neither dead nor truly alive, in a state of cosmic hibernation. And they spoke of portals, passages between dimensions, of which the well before me was but a minor manifestation. If you haven't yet activated the bell, do so now to follow our journey into the shadows of the unknown. I share new revelations every week, unearthing secrets that defy human comprehension. Leave a like if you too have felt the presence of something watching from the shadows, something ancient and patient that whispers while we sleep. Something in the water moved. At first I thought it was just a reflection of my flashlight's light, but then I saw it clearly. The surface rippled as if something were approaching from below, and with that movement, the murmurs turned into a rhythmic, unified chant, like a congregation reciting prayers in unison. Fright finally overcame morbid curiosity. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off the well. The surface of the water was now bubbling, and a greenish glow began to emanate from the depths. The statues seemed to watch with their inhuman features, silent witnesses to a ritual that had been repeated for centuries. It was then that my flashlight illuminated something I had not noticed before: human remains, half hidden in the shadows in the corners of the chamber. Bones bleached with age, arranged in deliberate patterns, suggesting that they were not simply abandoned bodies, but participants in some macabre ritual, perhaps voluntary sacrifices. Amidst these remains, I recognized modern objects: a fountain pen, fragments of eyeglasses, and what appeared to be a pocket watch engraved with the initials E.B., Elijah Blackwood. The horrific realization struck me like a physical blow. My great-uncle had not died of natural causes in his bed, as I had been told. He had met his end, here, in this chamber, either as a victim or a willing participant in something unspeakable. With a scream I did not recognize as my own, I threw myself toward the door. But it was too late. The water from the well was now overflowing, not as a normal liquid, but as a gelatinous, semi-translucent substance that moved with conscious purpose, blocking my path. And from it emerged something. I cannot adequately describe its form, for it seemed to change with every moment, defying the laws of physics and biology. It had aspects of a cephalopod, with undulating tentacles, but also features reminiscent of fungi and crustaceans, all fused into a pulsating mass that emanated an ancient and malevolent intelligence. The chanting on the walls reached a deafening crescendo, and I felt something breaking inside my mind. Psychic barriers that protect us from knowing what truly exists beyond the veil of consensual reality. What happened next is difficult to relate, for my perception fragmented into kaleidoscopic shards of horror. I remember tentacles wrapping around my limbs, not to hurt, but to immobilize me. I remember a voice, not physical, but directly in my consciousness, speaking in a language I should never have been able to understand, but which now made terrible sense. It spoke of an ancient pact, begun by Jeremiah Blackwood and upheld by generations of my family, blood in exchange for knowledge and power. With each generation, a Blackwood must renew the pact, offering himself not as a sacrifice, but as a conduit, a temporary vessel for these entities to experience our world. Elijah had fulfilled his role, and now it was my turn. I fought with all the strength I had, both physically and mentally, refusing to accept this fate. For a brief moment I managed to break free and run toward the door, but what followed me was not confined by the physical laws we know. The gelatinous substance oozed down the walls, blocking my escape once again. That was when I realized the true nature of the symbols carved into the walls of the antechamber and the doorframes of the mansion. They were not to keep something out, but to contain what was within, to limit its influence to the perimeter of the estate. In a flash of intuition, born of desperation, I snatched the book from the altar and threw it into the well. There was a sound, like the scream of 1,000 voices in agony, and the gelatinous substance momentarily retreated. I seized the opportunity to run desperately for the door. I managed to break through and close it behind me, but I knew that such a barrier would not hold back what I had awakened for long. I stumbled up the stairs, feeling the entire mansion vibrate around me. The murmurs in the walls were now screams, a chorus of ancient fury. I reached the library in time to see books falling from the shelves of their own accord, furniture sliding across the floor without any visible force to move them. I ran for the front door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. Every exit I tried was blocked in a similar way, as if the house itself were alive and determined to hold me captive. It was then that I understood. The entire mansion was part of the ritual, its architecture deliberately designed as an arcane, a symbol on a monumental scale. The walls did not merely contain the whispers, they were the whispers, vibrating membranes between our reality and what lay beyond. In my desperation, I resorted to an extreme measure. I found Elijah's study where I knew there was a small fireplace. The fire still smoldered, perhaps never having been completely extinguished in the years since my great-uncle's death. I grabbed a poker and, without hesitation, thrust it against the age-dried curtains. The flames spread with surprising voracity, as if the fire itself recognized the unholy nature of the place and was eager to purify it. Within minutes, large parts of the lower floor were ablaze. The smoke was thick and choking, but I would rather die from the fire than submit to the fate that awaited me in the subterranean chamber. To my astonishment, as the fire consumed the structure of the house, the murmurs in the walls turned into agonized screams. The flames seemed to destroy not only physical matter, but also something more fundamental, something that inhabited the interstices of reality itself. That was when a section of the ceiling collapsed, opening an unexpected path to the outside. With my lungs burning from the smoke I had inhaled and my skin singed in several places, I threw myself through the opening and rolled across the damp lawn, getting as far away from the burning mansion as I could. From a distance, I considered. Safe, I observed the inferno I had created. The flames rose into the night sky in furious spirals, and I could have sworn that they momentarily formed patterns similar to the symbols on the walls of the underground chamber. The sound of the fire consuming the ancient wood was mixed with something else, something like the collective wail of dying creatures. When the first villagers arrived, drawn by the glow, they found me in a state of shock, mumbling incoherently about walls that talked and things rising from dark wells. I was taken to the small local hospital, where they treated my physical burns but could do nothing for the trauma that was tearing at my mind. I remained hospitalized for 2 weeks, oscillating between periods of relative lucidity and episodes of absolute terror, during which I had to be restrained so as not to harm myself or others. When I was finally deemed stable enough, I made arrangements to return to my academic life, determined to leave Ravenscroft and its horrific memories behind. But one cannot simply walk away from forbidden knowledge once it has been acquired. In the months that followed, I discovered that the whispers had not been destroyed with the mansion. They had simply found a new home. In the walls of my apartment, in the whispers of the wind, in the dreams that haunt me every time I close my eyes, and worse, I began to notice changes in myself. My reflection in the mirror looks slightly different every day. Not dramatically or immediately noticeable, but slight changes in facial symmetry, in the texture of my skin, in the color of my eyes. My colleagues comment on my paleness, on the strange gleam in my eyes. I recently discovered that I obsessively draw symbols during departmental meetings, without even realizing it until someone points it out. They are the same symbols on the walls of the mansion, emerging from some dark corner of my infected mind. And the water. I can no longer go near bodies of water without feeling irrational panic. Even the sound of the rain sends uncontrollable shivers through me, as if each drop contains something trying to reach me. I know what is happening. The pact was not broken with the destruction of the mansion. Whatever emerged from the well, that night has found a new vessel, myself. I can feel its presence growing within me, like a cosmic parasite gradually consuming my identity. I write this as a final act of resistance, a testament to my struggle against the inevitable. And as a warning, there are places in this world where the barrier between dimensions is thin, where ancient entities wait patiently. If you find a mansion on cliffs with strange symbols carved into the doorframes, do not enter. If you hear whispers in the walls, do not listen. And above all, if you discover a passage that leads to the depths, seal it and flee. For the knowledge that awaits in the darkness will exact a price no human soul should pay. The whispers are louder now, more understandable every day. They are chanting my name, calling me to the depths. And I fear that soon I will no longer have the strength to resist their call. Then if this tale comes to an abrupt end, you will know why. Thomas Blackwood will have ceased to exist, consumed by something that should never have been disturbed, something that waited patiently in the walls, whispering its ancient secrets. Sleep has eluded me for 3 days now. The murmurs are constant now, even outdoors. I feel something moving beneath my skin, as if my own body is being reshaped from the inside out. There is no escape. This will be my last entry. The tide is rising, and with it, they come, the walls. Whisper that it is time for me to join my ancestors in the depths where they wait. I feel strangely at peace with this now. Like Elijah before me, I finally understand that this is not an end, but a transformation. The murmur of the walls. The murmur has become my own voice,